Hi, I'm Bill Spring. I'm with a partner at News Travels Fast. We promote culture and the arts, and we have the great pleasure of being in the beautiful Zürcher Gallery today. And we are with representatives from the Boca Museum of Art, and as well as two artists, one of whom has an exhibition here right now. So what I'm going to do is we'll start down here with Irvin. If you guys can introduce yourselves, and then come back to me and I'll start asking some questions.
Good. Irvin Lippman. I'm the executive director of the Boca de Raton Museum of Art.
I'm Kathy Goncharov. I'm senior curator at the Boca Museum of Art.
Daniel Faust. I have one of the exhibitions at the museum that opens in November having to do with Florida photographs from the 1980s.
I'm Kyle Staver, painter.
Great. And so Irvin and Kathy, you have an amazing show opening next month. It's called Imagining Florida, History and Myth in the Sunshine State. So if you can tell us a little more about that exhibition, the evolution of it, how it began, and where it's going.
For the last 3 years, we've been working on this exhibition. Our guest curators, Jennifer Harden, who's looked at the paintings and watercolors of artists who traveled to Florida from the late 1700s to the mid-20th century, and Gary Monroe, who's looked at the photographs by artists from the beginning of the 20th century to 1969. Actually, the last photograph in the exhibition is a Gary Winogrand photograph at Cape Kennedy, and it's an appropriate end to the show because at that point, it wasn't so much about Florida and the exotic nature and the fauna. It really was about a new modern age, looking to travel global, Disneyland, and the art scene became quite different. We thought it was an important show to do because we've become very contemporary-centric, and it's important to know that artists have been coming to Florida from the late 1700s, like George Catlin and Audubon, and then in the 19th century, Martin Johnson Head and Frederick Remington and Winslow Homer. So the exhibition, I think, looks very broadly at about 2.5 centuries of artists coming to Florida. And then Kathy has very smartly organized two ancillary exhibitions that bring it to a contemporary focus. I'll let Kathy talk about that.
Yeah, one of the exhibitions is Daniel's photographs taken in Florida at museums and amusements and around Florida in the 80s. And how many pictures are there? There's 268, right? So it's
about 800.
Oh, it's grown. 800. No, I mean in the show.
There are 14 pieces.
Yeah, that big photo mural with all of these photographs of a lot of museums that no longer exist. And as I say, amusements from Epcot, Disney, well, you can go on about it. And the other exhibition is an installation by Michael Smith, who is a video and performance artist who has an installation called, Excuse Me, I'm Looking for the Fountain of Youth. So part of it was done, it's about aging, and part of it is him going to St. Augustine and looking for the Fountain of Youth as a tourist with his map, and he's got a conquistador outfit on, and he's asking directions, where is the Fountain of Youth? And it goes on from there. So it's not all about Florida, but it starts with that. So there are two contemporary shows that go along with this historic show.
Excellent. So Irvin, there's like over 200 works in the show, right?
Correct.
And it's from different collections and different...
Yes.
Yeah.
So everything in the exhibition, except for one photograph, is from museums, from the Metropolitan, from the National Gallery, from the Smithsonian. Some works, like this wonderful Ralston Crawford painting of the bridge to Tampa, was bought by Joe Hirshhorn in 1963. It's a 1938 painting by Ralston Crawford, and really has not been on view. We actually paid for the conservation so that it could be brought out. A number of the WPA paintings from the Smithsonian Museum of American Art really have not been on view ever. So it's going to be a very, I think, important exhibition. A number of private collections have loaned their works, but yeah, I'm very excited about it. The cover of the exhibition is the wonderful photograph by Marion Post Wolcott, of a photograph from 1941, and there you'll see three ladies in their dark dresses with a gentleman with a hat sitting on the sands of Sarasota. Their car, big black vehicle with a license plate Ohio 1940. So it sort of takes you back in sort of a romantic way to how people imagine Florida and what they expected from this state that was so exotic from the late 1700s really on, well, even today. It has sort of a exotic flavor to it. It's, I think it's going to be a remarkable, sort of beautiful show that opens mid-November and continues through March 24th.
Excellent. So it'll be up during Art Basel. So if anyone's down, in Miami during that time, it's just like 24 minutes up, and it's a show worth seeing.
Well,
it's
24
really
minutes if you're, if you're wishing your way there.
That's right.
I would give yourself 45 minutes.
Yeah, of course. And so, Daniel, tell us a little bit about your photography and your show at the museum.
Kathy and I have been working on this actually for a number of years, and I'm very pleased to be doing this. My family actually has a history of photography in Florida, and the exhibition that I've organized actually starts with my grandmother, Edith Faust, who was there in 1938. So there's a series of snapshots of her in Florida in 1938. And then when I was 9 years old, I was there with my Instamatic photographing. So there are two panels that start 1938, 1965. And then from there, it goes on. In 1983, I went to Epcot and Disney World, and then to Stars Hall of Fame. It's a strange place, Epcot, because Disney had this idyllic fantasy of the future, and it has very little relationship to really what happened. Which sort of reminds me of Silicon Valley. I mean, there are all these so-called innovators who are predicting the future, and then they're going to improve things, but at the end of the day, that doesn't seem to be the case.
Right.
So then after, a few years later, in 1986, I started at the Swimming Hall of Fame in Fort Lauderdale.
Of course, yeah, we're familiar with that.
Yeah. Oh, you are, yeah.
Of course. Well, we're South Floridians, so.
Okay, okay. And then it became an obsession. I drove all over the state photographing at a lot of wax museums. There's the one in St. Augustine and over to the West Coast. So there are hundreds and hundreds of photographs, and many of these places no longer exist.
Right, what is this, there's like a circus town, or there's also like I don't know, it's supposed to be like I guess I'm just off base here, but I mean, there are a lot of unusual places in Florida is what I'm trying to say.
Weird. But when I hear the word weird, to me, that's the beginning of the discussion. It's like, I don't understand it, which makes me even more curious to understand why people are doing what they're doing. And there's an undercurrent of what's going on underneath.
Oh, great.
So for example, the Shipwreckers Museum in Key West. Key West was the wealthiest city in the United States with the shipwreckers. I don't know if you know this, because there were all these ships that wrecked, and there was all this gold and all this. So for, I think, 10, 15 years, it became a very, very wealthy community. And then, of course, near there is the Hemingway House.
Of course, and David Wachowski, a big developer down there, just passed away. Right, so yeah, I mean, Key West is such an amazing place.
And then there are these esoteric places. For example, there's the Hurricane Museum. The Hurricane Museum, I think, was in a warehouse. I was there in 1989, and I've done Google searches. I can't find it. I think it was around for maybe 6 months.
Yeah. And so,
so there are these very homemade, kind of funky. Yes.
And so you kind of combined all these photographs together for the exhibition, correct?
Yes, yeah. On the one hand, there are panels that are 7.5 feet in height by 5 feet wide. They consist of 60 to 80 photographs. And this is a very site-specific. So the photographs fit proportionally in the space of the museum.
Wow.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And then, the last photograph is from the Wicky Wacky Springs. It's a mermaid.
I know.
Yeah.
I always wanted to go there.
Oh, I would recommend.
I think so too.
Yes.
And so Kyle, we're in this gallery surrounded by your beautiful work. If you can tell us more about your work.
They weren't made in Florida.
Was there any inspiration?
I have a mermaid. Yeah,
There we
maybe
go.
she could go to Wiki Wacky and meet the. No, this is fascinating that you're putting together. You know, Florida is a place that I was from northern Minnesota, and we would go there to escape and visit grandparents. So it was between Minnesota and Florida, there was nothing but, I have no idea, but grandparents. So it was kind of a miracle place that you're putting together, and that there were artists that went down there. I just think of it as where grandparents went. Do you know?
I know.
So-
It's grown up.
Yeah,
It
no,
used to be a
it's
punchline in the Seinfeld joke.
no, and then you take
it's
your
not anymore. Yeah.
you take your kid to Disney World, yeah, and that's a nightmare. So that's once your grandparents have passed on, you have a child and you go to this. So I don't know very much about Florida except in that capacity. So it's fascinating that you're standing up for Florida, you know, giving it another presence than.
Well, it's the third largest state now. California,
you know,
Texas,
it's, you know,
Florida,
politically
population.
it's kind of a nightmare. Grandparently, it was a long flight to, right? You know, it's a funny place.
It's
So
a
to
state of
just think of
mind,
it, to think of it as something like a real place. That's an interesting idea.
Well, it's very diverse. I mean, on
Yeah.
the one hand, it's very sophisticated. On the other hand, there are feuds going on, family feuds going on.
Sure.
No, it's-
Over beachfront property, or what do
Well, very wealthy and very poor communities.
Yeah,
It's-
yeah.
To me, it's a reflection of America.
Yeah. So I'm interested, I mean, the show at the museum has to do with the history of myth, and your work involves myth a great deal, right?
Yeah, it does. More important to me in my paintings than myths are that they're stories that we share. Okay. If I start to tell you about Adam and Eve, which is a Bible story, you have a very clear sense of what that story means. Okay. I made a painting of Adam and Eve, and I put a goat in, and somebody came into my studio and said, "There are no goats in Adam and Eve," because it's a story that they carry, and they know the truth. There are no Adam and Eve. So I like to use myths or Bible stories or stories that we share, even if we don't know exactly what we're talking about. Right. You know, wiki wacky mermaids. They're starting with that we know about mermaids, and then what do you do with that? But we're already sharing in, well, I know what mermaids are. So that's the sense and spirit in which I use myths in my work, that we start from the same place. We share them. I love that word. Where does the word wiki wacky
Well, that's
come
the
from?
name of the town.
Is it really?
Yes.
You're not making it up?
No. No, fact is stranger than
Well, I grew up in Bowabic, and I lived on Lake Asquabama.
Well, I know.
So I mean, these are.
I know Minneapolis.
Do you know northern Minnesota?
Yes, I do.
How do you know northern?
I
Well, we'll talk about that.
traveled and photographed all over the United States.
Really? Yeah.
And Kathy is from Detroit, and you've probably been to
Yeah.
Minneapolis. Yeah.
No, I never have.
Minnesota, no?
It's even colder up there.
It's very cold up there.
Too cold.
Yeah, right. No, that's
Snow.
why. No, that's why we went to Florida to visit our grandparents that
Yeah.
weren't going to shovel snow
Yeah.
anymore. Do you know?
Right.
It was always Fort Lauderdale.
Oh,
Fort Lauderdale.
why Fort Lauderdale?
I had no idea. Fort Lauderdale. I can remember being a little kid saying Fort Lauderdale. It was like the.
So how was it to originate the show? I mean, it took a while, right?
No, we've been working on it for 3 years, and a wonderful catalog will be produced and available during the exhibition. So yeah, no, it's been a labor of love because I thought it was really, there haven't been exhibitions as comprehensive as this.
Right.
There have been smaller exhibitions, or there have been exhibitions of private collections of Florida art, but nothing that combined the paintings and as well as photographs. And then we have this coda to the exhibition of material culture that Gary Monroe curated as well, where you have a standing alligator lamp where you can screw the light bulb in the mouth, and TV trays, and so in many ways this is what people were taking home with them in the 1950s, just as some decades before, people would take home the small painting by Thomas Moran or Martin Johnson Head, just very similar to what happened during the grand tours in Europe, when you would go home with a Canaletto to remind you of your trip to Venice. The similarities are they're actually, it's very apt because Thomas Moran's paintings are very Turneresque. Except for the palm trees that are sort of off to the side, you could assume that St. John's River was the Grand Canal. It's, I think, a very diverse show. But I might mention also, at the same time, we've done a major renovation of the exterior of the museum. And I'd like Kathy to talk about one of the very special parts of the exhibition, or of the exterior, is a wall that we commissioned, a cloud wall by Jeffrey Hendricks.
Yes, Jeff Hendricks, who's one of the founders of Fluxus. He recently passed away, and it started before he died. And so he's very much part of it, but his assistant has helped put it all together. So he was a performance artist, mainly, but he also painted. And his whole work was about the sky, clouds. His son is Bracken, his daughter is Tyche. So everything is kind of this cosmology. And he would do these dream performances, and he's a very important artist. And this is a cloudscape that covers, how big is the window? It's
32 feet tall, 19 feet wide.
Yeah, so you will see this going down the highway on the front of the building. And it's really, really spectacular.
I didn't know beforehand, it's like there were art centers. There were different populations and different things, like the Maitland Arts Center, and if you can kind of expand on that more.
Yeah. Well, there's a Maitland Art Center, St. Augustine had an art center. But again, artists were coming down, some for their health, some like Winslow Homer, because he said he was the best fishing in America. He went to Key West. It really wasn't until Beanie Backus, who's from Port St. Lucie, started to paint, and he was one of the first of the artists in the earlier part of the 20th century who lived there year-round. And his great importance, I think, is that he trained a number of African-American artists, principally Alfred Hare and Harold Newton, who did these wonderful landscapes the way you expected Florida to be, and they bartered these paintings for televisions and for appliances, and then now they've become quite valuable in their own right. They've long since passed, but their paintings live on as mementos of what people wanted Florida to be. These were definitely geared to folks who were still romanticizing this Florida that was soon passing by because of the great changes in condo dwellings and the Disney World. So that's why we stopped the exhibition in 1969, because Florida becomes something quite different as it attracts Rauschenberg and Rosenquist and then artists who have a much more global view of the world.
The thing about that group of African Americans, they're called the Highwaymen, and they did sell them along the road. Right. I mean, they're like for tourists. Yeah. It's just really fascinating. And now they're, collected by serious collectors.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Kyle, I mean, it's so great being in this space around your work, and I'm curious, I mean, there are paintings, and then there are these also on the wall, these...
The reliefs?
Right, yeah, if
right.
you can explain those more to me.
I build them in conjunction with the paintings. They're like tools.
Okay.
To help with the making of the paintings.
Mm-hmm. And what's the medium of these?
They're made out of low-fine white clay.
Cool. And did you make these before? I mean, you made them in conjunction?
At the same time, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Cool. And like the theme of this show, I mean, is there? I'm sorry, I'm so just off the street here. If you can tell me the theme and expand a little on it as well.
I don't like naming my shows.
Yeah.
Do you know? That doesn't.
But what's the title of the work?
There'll be Psyche's Watch. The titles of them will just allow you to identify the painting. But it's some artists name their painting there, and they're quite poetic, and it's marvelous.
Yeah. Well, Psyche's pretty poetic.
Well, Psyche, it's Psyche. Psyche.
Yeah. As opposed to Untitled.
Sorry?
As opposed to Untitled.
Psyche Untitled, right. Yeah, why not? In Florida.
Why not?
I had to take the alligator out, though. I had to take the alligator
You
out.
put a palm tree in, and it's Florida.
I know. Do you know there's a great thing, Monet, writing his letters, he goes down and he's confronting a palm tree, and he's writing, I don't know, to his friend, Dear Joe, goddamn palm trees, what are you gonna do? He just couldn't pull one off. It was such a mistake, and they're very strange to put into a painting. You think, well, this is gonna be great, and they're not so great. Some painters do it, but Monet was just, really complaining about them.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
weird. I guess they weren't with
But they're important because they withstand the winds and the
Well,
hurricanes.
the other thing is, if you don't tend to your,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
they just kind of look like monsters.
Well, it's true for all of us.
That's true, yes.
That's absolutely true.
I mean, they're huge. They're huge. Now I've gotten used to them, but it scared me.
So now you have to come to Florida and see the show.
I haven't been there for a long time. Yeah.
Well, it's changed a lot. A lot about Florida is development, which is also in the show a great deal. We're dealing with a lot of issues in Florida, obviously political and environmental issues,
Yeah.
which the show addresses. Even though it ends at 1969, right before a lot of development began, there's always things still going on in Florida.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, people are always missing what they thought they used to have, but that happens everywhere.
So your show is up for how long here?
3 more days.
3 more days,
3
okay.
more days. Hurry, hurry, hurry.
And Daniel, your show opens when?
November 11th.
Yeah, it runs at the same. The two contemporary shows that are auxiliary to the main
So
historical show.
how many pieces are in this big show?
Well, there are 200 works in Imagining Florida, and then we have Daniel's 650 photographs that are somehow put into these large mural-size sheets. And then I'm not sure how many
Michael
works
must be
Smith
about
had.
40 works, but it's
Yeah.
mainly an installation.
Yeah.
So it's,
Yeah.
there are lots of video and
And there's a water fountain,
a water fountain.
the fountain view.
Yeah.
And the cool thing, the show is not traveling, which is actually very good.
Well, speak for yourself.
Oh, okay, yes. Little did I know.
Is your show traveling? Is that you're part of it coming?
Well, there are 3 shows here, and I'm in the middle of discussion with traveling it, for example, in Italy and probably California and other places. Okay. And there will probably be a publication with it also.
How do you think photography and painting works together?
Well, let me begin by saying I have absolutely no talent, skill, or ability in painting or drawing.
But I have an iPhone, so I'm a great photographer. Oh. There you go.
Okay.
Is that our conversation? Yeah.
They're very different medium. For me, I was working with film, with Kodachrome film and with flash, and technically now you don't have Kodachrome. It was a very special palette, sort of like a film from the 1950s or 60s. It has a very warm palette to it. And then technically, this is slide film, which is transferred digitally. And then there's a lot of work involved with it's called retouching, but I don't consider it that. I consider it, you're changing the tonalities and the colors and the contrasts. You're constantly adjusting them, and then the relationship between one photograph and another photograph, how you put them together where they're complementary and cohesive.
That sounds like a really good description of painting.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just tinkering around with values and color and this to that, putting it together,
and
seeing if they
also
agree.
size is very important. For me, that's very important, how you put things together, whether they're small or large, and certain photographs work very well large. For example, the The mermaid is literally 5 feet by 7.5 feet.
The photograph of
That particular photograph.
So your photograph is life size. It's a 1:1 ratio.
No, it's significantly larger.
Your photograph is larger than the.
Well, that's one of the things about photography is you can make things smaller or larger proportionally.
You can do it in painting too.
Of course.
Yeah.
But I think that that's important that you can shift these things.
Yeah.
In a sense, transforming them.
No, I just wondered if the mermaid, the photograph of the mermaid is
Yes.
1:1.
No.
Okay, that's not an answer. What's the relationship? How big is the mermaid to your photograph? Is she smaller and you blew her up, or is she huge and you shrank her down?
Well, well, there are actually a number of mermaids, and they're
You
smaller.
didn't mention that.
Well,
You didn't say it was a gaggle.
a gaggle. Well, actually, there are a number of mermaid photographs, about 20 of them, but this one in particular, the photograph is larger, but the mermaids are smaller proportionally. They're not on a 1-to-1 ratio.
In a way, it's kind of abstract because it's almost all blue.
It is.
And
it's a very aqua blue.
It looks like a painting, actually. It really does.
And because of the size, the grain is very large. So when you're up close, you can see the grain, but as you go back.
And those are all photographs from the 80s in Florida, right?
83, 86, and 89.